Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Olivia Jepson from Sprout Social, calling in from Chicago. Welcome here today.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you about social media audit and Sprout Social obviously being a pretty big deal in the social media world. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about your role and about Sprout Social?
Yeah, I always think this question is kind of funny because my role is so meta because I do social media for a social media company. So even it's just really interesting because our customers are basically in the same mindset as my entire team. So it's basically like we're marketing to ourselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm the social media specialist at Sprout Social. So I have one other person on my team, my manager, who oversees all of our strategy, and then my role is really, diving into our goals, making sure that we're meeting our goals, strategizing what do we need to meet our goals for the year, and then really working across the whole organization. So I work really closely with our product team on like new features, which is really fun. I get to test new features and give feedback. I talk a lot with our sales team they're talking with our customers every single day. So they'll ask us for like our opinions on things and just feedback on like some kind of approach. And then I work really closely with our creative team and brand creative teams to just create content across social, making sure that everything feels really cohesive with the rest of our brand. So yeah, it keeps me busy.
That's great. That's really interesting. And it is interesting when you say, like, I do social media. So for a social media company,
Yeah,
it's kind of funny, isn't it?
I know it really is. It's definitely a unique perspective for sure.
Yeah. So when we talk about a social media audit, maybe we'll kind of level the playing field here. First, understanding what is the difference between paid, owned, and earned media, and what does that mean to you at Sprout?
Yeah, so really for us, my team focuses solely on organic social media, and then there's another person who manages all of our paid social. And even though we're on different teams, we are like constantly talking. But yeah, for paid, they have a completely different strategy than what we focus on for organic. For organic, our main goal is awareness, community engagement, whereas paid, we're really focused on acquisition and gaining leads. So we really measure success differently. So that's kind of the difference really between paid for us, and then for organic social, we are monitoring our owned and earned social. So for us, owned really means anything that we're putting out there. So impressions and engagement that are coming in from the content that we're directly publishing. And then earned for us, we have a social listening tool. That's how we measure earned.
Yeah.
And that's really, you can plug in a hashtag or a keyword around like your brand. And then you can measure volume, potential impressions, engagements, sentiment, like kind of the whole ladder. And so that's really how we're measuring for earned media or earned social media.
And so and then you're using your own tool. You're
Yeah.
using your Sprout tool to measure Sprout success in earned or owned or whichever.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll do that on a brand level and like a campaign level. So I think a good example of this is we launched an awards program for social media managers. And so a lot of that conversation is happening on our own posts that we're pushing out, but we actually found out that more of that conversation is happening outside of our posts. People are nominating other social media managers. People are, nominating brands or like just social teams that they love and admire. And all of that's just really happening on the hashtag that we have for that campaign.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to learn too between like really success there, because I don't think initially what we were seeing from an owned perspective is what we wanted, but what was happening outside of our own content was more than we could have imagined.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So when we think about a social media audit, how do you and how does Sprout view a social media audit, and how would you go through the process of completing one?
Yeah. So this is something that we do every year, and I usually every year, but we'll also do it on a quarterly basis. But Essentially, we will look at our goals for the upcoming year or upcoming quarter, and then we'll retrospectively look at our data and say, okay, these are the top initiatives that are performing really well. These are the ones that we could maybe improve on. These are the ones that we should maybe just stop doing altogether because they're not serving us well for the amount of effort that it's taking us to do them. Yeah. And then from there, we can like act and strategize really based on those results. So some of the things that we're looking at when we dive into the data there in that initial stage would be, impressions, anything that really could tell us like about what people are seeing or when people are seeing our content, how often, just really how many eyeballs are we getting. And then engagements is huge for us too. I think engagements can have like some like vanity metrics, and so can awareness metrics. But I think for us, the main ones are, are people starting conversations with us through comments versus just, simply tapping like. Are they sharing? Are they quote tweeting? Are they really going beyond just that initial like vanity metric?
Okay. Can you just explain what is a vanity metric?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question because I think it has a lot of definitions, but I think for me, a vanity metric is kind of a passive engagement.
Okay.
Something that if you see a photo on Instagram because it's from a brand you like, you would just like it and engage with it versus it actually being thought-provoking content.
Right.
Where you would take that next step and share or comment or something like that.
So kind of it's related to really how much you would maybe engage in that content or how thought-provoking or interesting or funny it might be to you to get you to actually stop and pause and like engage with it.
Yeah.
That's great.
And those are important for us specifically too, because in one of our reports that I reference quite frequently, it's called our post-performance report. And so for an example, if I'm auditing the entire year of content, that obviously pulls in so many posts. It's and if you couldn't filter by, what engagement you're prioritizing or really whatever metric that you're looking at, it could be very daunting.
Yeah.
But basically what I do is then I filter by, okay, which post had the most shares? And then from there I can really filter in on, what campaign did this feed into? Should we optimize here? Is this something we should stop doing or grow in the future? Things like that.
Oh, that's excellent. So when you look at a social media audit, one thing you kind of referenced earlier, and I just kind of want to pick up on is, I think you said something like, we look at our goals and objectives and then look at an audit. And so do you feel like setting up an audit prior to formulating your strategy, maybe your goals and objectives is important? Or do you do audit and then set up goals and objectives? Like, how does that actually happen?
Yeah, I think for us it happens, it's kind of twofold because we've done both. If we're doing an annual audit, usually we'll have our goals set in place before we do the audit so that we know what we're really trying to hit for the year ahead and how we can optimize our current strategy to meet those goals. If it's something for a campaign, if it's a new campaign, we'll kind of we'll set goals and then we'll look at what other similar campaigns we've run that we can, similar to the annual audit. But
right.
We do have, so for example, we have a recurring campaign every year where we release a data report. It's called the Sprout Social Index. And so that's been something, I think this is maybe like I can't remember actually how many we've had, but.
And this is something released to the public?
Yeah. It's released to the public and we do it pretty much like on an annual basis. So this is always something that is huge for social. So that really feeds into our overall goals. But because we have benchmarks from previous years and we know we have those strategies to reference, we will look at like what performed the best in that strategy and optimize it for the year ahead. And really our goals feed into the overall goals for the whole report.
Right.
So based on that audit, then we can set goals moving forward.
Okay, that's interesting. And in the audit, when you actually perform the audit, is this uh, something that Sprout software does for you immediately? Is this a process of weeks of sorting data? Like, what does it actually look like when you actually do this task?
Yeah. When I'm doing this task, I'm usually referencing a lot of different reports
Mm,
in Sprout. It's not really just a kind of you run a social media audit report in Sprout. We have a lot of different reports that feed into the data that our team is interested in knowing. So really, that process is pulling each of those different data points from the different reports, the different campaigns within Sprout, laying all that data out in a spreadsheet, and then really kind of going into like what I referenced earlier is our like start, stop, continue document,
right.
where it's kind of just like a huge brainstorm of things that we want to start, stop, and continue
Yeah.
based on all of those data points in that spreadsheet.
So when you're looking at the idea of stop, start, and
Yeah.
continue, are you thinking, or are you looking at, specific social networks you might not want to use anymore, specific types of content, time of day that postings don't work, specific messaging? What type of categories are you looking at there?
Yeah, I would say definitely content is our priority.
Mm,
A lot of our content kind of spans across networks, so we're looking at like what content does the best on each network. But
mm,
so, for example, employer brand content, which is really just content about our team, how we work, just like highlighting our team and the different roles that people play in our organization. We found that content, we were kind of publishing that everywhere, but
right.
we found that like in the last audit that we just did, LinkedIn was so huge for
Mm,
that target, or for that content.
yeah.
LinkedIn and Instagram were like definitely where our audience was most interested in that content.
Mm,
And Twitter too. I think in previous years our audience has evolved a lot, because initially it seemed kind of more like our Twitter audience was more interested in how to conduct a social media audit or
yeah.
kind of like how to types of things
Yeah.
and that kind of content. Whereas now we kind of saw a shift in the last year that people are really more interested in thought leadership, thought provoking content there.
Hmm.
So I think doing this can tell you a lot about just your content overall, but then I think from that you can really hone in on each network and
Right.
adjust accordingly.
Does day of the week and time of day impact content or specific types of content on specific networks?
Yeah, I think this is like kind of a loaded question, because it definitely depends on industry as well.
Mm.
We actually have a report that we do every year that analyzes all of our customer data, to say like, okay, that for the entertainment industry, this is when your audience is most active,
Right.
days of the week, and we kind of do that for each industry.
Hmm.
But I do think it definitely impacts how well your content performs.
Right.
It just really depends on where your industry is, your time zone,
Yeah.
things like that.
So there's no standard, but we can maybe get an idea through your guys' reports on the specific industry we're in related to the social network, time of day, day of week,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's super helpful. It's always a topic of conversation, right? Like, did it not work because of the message or the day or what else was happening in society? Because there are so
Mhm.
many different, I guess, external factors that are impacting the success of a specific post.
Yeah. That's actually super interesting. So we launched our initial 2020 report on that data, I believe, early March or late February last year. So
Hmm.
right before really the pandemic impacted a lot of people across the world.
Hmm.
And we noticed that we kind of took a second look at that data to just see how COVID affected this and like
Hmm.
when it affected like when people were online more or and kind of broke that down by industry again a few months later to just really see that impact. And I think it changed a lot of that initial data. So
Right.
I'm happy to share those links after this too with you. But it was really interesting to see how that shifted.
So I guess, are we seeing things like, because maybe people aren't on transit, so when they usually would be on their phone on transit on their way to work in the morning, at
Hmm.
whatever, 7 or 8 in the morning, maybe they're not there being engaged like they once were. Things
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even, people are just online a lot more because, it's like you wake up and you look at your tiny screen and then you are at work or in class or something, you're looking at your like medium-sized screen and then afterwards then you're back on your tiny screen or your
Yeah.
like TV screen.
It's just
But
like, from which size screen are you going to go from one to the next during the day?
yeah, exactly.
That's great. And so I think this is really helpful to get us to understand an audit. Now, are there, if you were to, if your boss were to say, okay, Olivia, you can only have three things that you can look at in your audit, three metrics. So, like, what are the most important, the most key things that you feel like, if this is not involved in my audit is kind of useless, or if I only had those many options, what would I want?
Yeah. For us, I would say social impressions, in social engagements as a whole, and
Mhm.
then I would say this is hard. It's like Sophie's choice. um, I would say then earned earned impressions as well.
Learned
Um,
impressions, okay.
yeah, so our main goals, and I think that would definitely change based on like what your goals are.
Sure.
But our main goals, for example, for this year is awareness. That's our number one goal.
Mm,
So social impressions on our owned content, earned social impressions, and then engagements will always be important. So
yeah.
those would be the three that I would choose.
I think that's a really interesting comment that you make. It's like, well, here are the three things I would really lean on, but depending on my goals, I mean, those things might change.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to understand. It's like, you might have these metrics that are valuable to you, but you have a certain set of goals, and another organization has different goals, and those
Yeah,
metrics might not be that helpful in measuring those goals or objectives that they have.
yeah, for sure.
That's great. Well, Olivia, I think this has been a super interesting and helpful conversation to have, to learn a little bit about Sprout, also your role, and how you work in social media for a social media brand is fascinating. So thanks so much for being here with me here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you.